Got to turn that on. I get more nervous doing musical stuff. My hands start to sweat. Man, I'm lucky I wasn't singing. So how was your week? Good? I love when the weather gets cooler. I love, the fall. I do love the spring also when it starts getting a little bit warmer. But these in-between stages are great. And I love it. Pray with me. Oh, wait, sing with me first, and then we'll pray. Sing with me. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord. Father, great is your faithfulness. Great is your love. Lord, I just ask that the Spirit of the Lord is upon us. Father, I ask that you give us a spirit of joy, rejoicing, a spirit of honor and praise. Lord, may we glorify you always. In your heavenly and holy and powerful name we pray. Amen. So as you will see in your bulletin, I have changed the title. It was Pour Out to Fed Up. And hopefully you'll see why. But I want to tell you a couple of parables. The first is of a peacock. Now, if you've ever been around peacocks, which we had a friend in Texas that their neighborhood actually had roaming peacocks. And they protected them, so they would be all around. Now, if you know anything about peacocks, they do not have a nice voice. Ah! And it is sort of an ugly voice. And this peacock, this peacock was self-aware. And would complain, and he'd say, I have such an ugly voice. And he would tell all the people around, yeah, I know I have an ugly voice. I have an ugly voice. And finally, he was talking to this fox, and he says, I'm sorry you have to hear me, fox. I have such an ugly voice. And the fox said, but you're such a beautiful animal. He says, but this ugly voice outshines my beauty. And the fox says, I've seen a bunch of animals, and they all have their different beauties. Why don't you see your beauty? And he says, I can't, because I hear my voice all the time. And he said, you know what? If God gave you a beautiful voice, you would find something else to complain about. And this is true. There's another fable. And do you remember Aesop's fables? These are some of Aesop's fables. And I love reading just fable over fable. And there's a fable of this man who owns a cart. And he loads up his huge cart. And the oxen are working so hard to pull the cart. Yet they're not complaining, and they're pulling and pulling. And as things get heavier, they are working harder and harder. But the wheels that are hardly doing anything are creaking and groaning and complaining. And finally the ox says, why are you complaining when you do so little? And you find out that these fables are so true within our lives. Now, there is a constant. If you are breathing, you complain. That is actually what I was reading some psychology articles, and they basically said it is innate within us to complain. There's an article called The 3 Types of Complaining in Psychology Today. And it defines complaining. It says, it introduces the article. It says, if complaining is so awful, Why is it so prevalent? It turns out that complaining has captured the attention of many of my colleagues. There is a growing body of research addressing complaining, what it is, when, and why it happens. To begin with, complaining is simply expressing dissatisfaction. Well, that doesn't sound too bad. This usually happens verbally, as is in the case of two people on a date commenting on the awful dinner that has been served. For consumers, it can happen through online feedback forms or customer service counters, but consumer complaints are their own matter. I'm going to stop there real quick, and I'm going to interject something. I do wonder if complaining sometimes happens because we have consumer mentality with every part of our lives. I'm not going to call out whose kids, but if you have had a child that has complained about the food you have fixed him or her, you understand. They have a right to a better dinner. They are paying you for your service, they think. They're paying you with loves and hugs. And so it says there are three types of complaints or complainers. The first is there are those who never seem to be satisfied. These are known as chronic complainers. They have a tendency to ruminate on problems and to focus on setbacks over progress. Now listen to this. Some research suggests that making a habit of complaint can rewrite the brain. It can rewire your brain so that those particular thinking orientations become ingrained. So if you start getting in the habit of complaining about stuff, your brain actually rewires to start looking at things from a negative perspective. Now, we know this happens because when we look in the mirror, do you normally look at what is good or what is flawed and complain about it? We usually look at the one zit when you're younger. Maybe some of you guys aren't getting zits anymore. But you look at the flaws, the wrinkles, the crow's feet, whatever it is, you find flaw over blessing. Most of the time, people are this way. We all do this. But if you start making a habit of this, especially verbalizing, you actually start rewiring your brain. A second type of complaint is the familiar venting. You're not actually looking to solve anything. Venting is just the expressing emotional dissatisfaction. It turns out that people who vent do have an agenda. They just don't necessarily always want the best solution. Their agenda is validation. Now, the third complaint was one called instrumental complaint, which basically means that you are seeking a solution. It's not saying that complaining is bad. What it's saying is if there is something wrong happening or bad, that you are seeking to change it and to be part of that solution. I don't think that's what Israel was doing as they were going in the wilderness. So I wanted you to turn, and it'll be up there, to Exodus 15. Now, ironically, this is before they get, I know we talked about Sinai last week, but I'm going to hit two different sections of the Bible. Ironically, this is before they get into Sinai, they go to Sinai, but they had just praised the Lord. They just did the Song of Moses about how great he is in delivering them. And in the same chapter, in verse 23, it says this. When they came to Marah, and does anybody know what Marah means? Bitterness. It's always been surprising when I've met some Marahs. And I don't know if you know this, but Mary and Miriam are from the same root word. But it means bitter. So, man, what a name. So when they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. Now it says they could not drink because it was bitter. That's why the place was called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Who did the people grumble against? Moses. This is your fault, Moses. Actually, they did not grumble to Moses. They grumbled against him about Moses. Most scholars believe that they were grumbling amongst themselves about. Now, if any of you have ever been in a ministry role, you've been complained about. I'm just going to let you know. I know I have been complained about. And probably some of it is justified. I remember at one place I was at, because I know this Adventist world, I was a little bit baffled. One of the parents since I was a youth pastor, complained to my superior that I was going too deep into Scripture and that maybe some of the kids were not getting it and that I should go on a more superficial sort of evangelistic. And I said, okay, that might be valid. But I asked my superior, could you please ask them to come to me? We have a thing called Matthew 18. If they disagree with me, I would be more than willing to talk with them. They never came. And later on, they said, we're just going to drop it. I had heard through my superior, we're going to drop it. I have rarely had somebody come to me with their challenges with me. I usually hear it from somebody else. That somebody feels that your preaching or somebody feels that your whatever is not good. That's how we grumble. I'm not saying I've been exempt from that. We have all complained. Now, here the thing is it says that they could not drink because the water was bitter. Now, it is believed by scholars that now there's a debate over it, whether this water was actually drinkable. If it was drinkable, but that just didn't taste good. There are some that believe that the Jewish people here, these Israelites, were not complaining because they were out of water. They were complaining because they were getting worse results than in Egypt. So they missed Egypt. And they said, I gave up Egypt for this? It's sort of like what Naaman said when he said, I've got pools at home that are way greater than the Jordan. Ugh. And they said, we gave up Egypt for this. They weren't dying of thirst. It just didn't taste that good. And so Moses throws a stick in, and it becomes sweet. Actually, the text that says it was bitter, the text in Hebrew, it says, ki marim hayim. Now, ki marim hayim literally is translated, they were bitter. The water is singular, so it would be weird to put a plural with a singular. The problem was not that the water was bitter, they were bitter. That it was not exactly the way they wanted. Maybe sometimes when we complain, it's not because the situation is that bad, is that sometimes we have let our core get a little rotten. Let's go further, because it goes boom, boom, boom. In both of these sets of text, boom, boom, boom. In chapter 16, verse 1, it says this: the whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin. It's not what you think. It's just a name, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day on the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. So they're sharing the wealth. It's not just Moses now. We'll give some to Aaron. And the Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt." Man, that's pretty. If only I had died. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Now, how many of you have ever been hangry? Do you know what it means to be hangry? I have been hangry before. I have known hangry people. There are people that when you get hungry enough, there's actually a Snickers commercial built on. Have you ever seen that where they're divas or something, and then it shows them the complaining, and then they give them a Snickers, and then they turn into their real self. I do not blame Israel for being hangry. But here's the thing I found out through my study, is they were not starving. They had animals. They had brought food on their trip. The challenge, if you look back at the verse, says this: there we sat around pots of meat and ate the food we wanted. What they did is you had meat. They didn't just have regular food. They had meat there. But to keep it, because you didn't have refrigerators in the wilderness, and they didn't have refrigerators otherwise, is you had to salt it or somehow be able to preserve it some other way. But they said in Egypt, we got to eat fresh meat. We had these small animals that we could kill every day, and it would be fresh, and we had fresh baked bread. And now you've brought us out to here. Again, the problem is we had something in Egypt that was better than what you are giving us. And again, they're complaining to the wrong person, because really they're complaining about who? God. Yet not to him. Exodus 17, verse 1. By the way, you know the answer there. God does not smite them. What he does is he gives them manna. In the rest of 16, he says, okay, I understand. You're hangry. I'm going to rain something down. You have to get it every day, except for on Sabbath. I'll keep it for, but every day. I will provide for you for as long as we're in the wilderness, every day of your life. Chapter 17, verse 1. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped in Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Now this one is different. It's not just bitter. There's no water. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Walk ahead of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff which you had struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock of Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders, and he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Now, I want you to to see something here. 3 incidences that they complain. 3 incidences that it's about necessity. Food and water is something we need to live. And in each of the situations, God does not smite the people. He actually provides for them. God understands. And I do think that at times God is patient with our complaining. He understands you do this. He understands that we worry and we fear the future. You know, in all of these situations, when I read some of these scholars, they believe that Israel never complained about something that was really dire except for this water situation. They had their provisions. They were worried about what might happen in the future. Do you worry about what might happen? Yes, we do. Most of us have a meal coming up in a little bit. Most of us do not worry or need to worry about what is happening for our food situation next. But some of you might already be worrying about, when I retire, will I have enough to feed me for the rest of my life? It is not an immediate situation, and I'm not saying it's not prudent to worry a little bit about this, be concerned. But the thing is sometimes this worry turns into complaining. And that's what was happening here. Do you notice Israel reacts different than Moses? Because in the next chapter, and I'm not going to read it, in chapter 18, Zipporah goes back with her dad, and then Moses says, Jethro came out and he sees Moses doing something from evening till morning. From morning till evening. He's judging the people. You know what he's probably listening to? Complaints. He's listening to complaining all day long. Yet Moses doesn't complain. He bears it. He's doing the opposite. And finally, Jethro says, this is not healthy. Actually, some commentaries believe that it was actually Zipporah that said, hey, Dad, they're killing Moses. They're sucking the life out of Moses. They just complain and complain and complain, and he's not saying anything. He's just taking it and taking it and taking it. And so he says, well, I got to go see this. And so he goes, and he's like, you're right. Moses, we need to divvy this out. Let other people hear the complaints. You will die. And so that's how we get this, where there's delegated listening, delegated judging. But you notice Moses, in the Spirit of the Lord, the meekest one on earth, it says, he doesn't complain. So fast forward, past Sinai, go to Numbers chapter 11. Because here's the other big chunk. It's just that God maybe reacts a little bit differently here. Numbers 11 verse 1 says this. Now the people complained about their hardships. And I'll get to what that literally says in Hebrew. Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord. And when he heard them, his anger was aroused. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed them from the outskirts of the camp. What that literally says, the complainers of their hardships, is in Hebrew it says the murmurers of evil or bad things, or what we would call inconveniences. They were no longer murmuring that they don't have water. They were murmuring, I stubbed my toe. They were murmuring, the light quite isn't exactly how I want it. It's not cloudy enough. It's not 74.6 degrees out. They started complaining about non-necessity things. They had moved, as you see in the next slide, they had moved from necessity to building a culture of complaining. Well, guess what? Squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? And we saw where God, when I complained about water, he made the water sweet. I complained about food, he gave us manna. I complained about water again, and he strikes a rock, water comes. Maybe if we complain, we get. You know this, parents. All of us have been guilty by hearing a complaint from our kid and finally giving in. Okay. All right, I know that we've got really good parents here, but probably at least once you've been guilty. Okay, you can watch that show. Okay, you can have that food. All right. They know. Kids know. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. You know this. Not in the Merman household, but everywhere else. It has happened. The challenge with it is they had moved from what was necessity to a culture of destruction. They were rewiring their brains to become chronic complainers. So God finally gets frustrated and says, you will destroy the whole community if I let this go. Because you know, Miss Williams, Miss Jimenez, you know if you let too much complaining go in your classrooms or whatever discord, it will take over. It will take over. I've seen it in churches. I have seen it in families, in schools. It becomes a culture, and people murmur about each other. And we're brothers and sisters in Christ. Go a few verses down to verse 4. It says, the rabble with them began to crave other food because they weren't happy with what they were getting. By the way, I just want to say I sort of understand because they had manna. Now you can make manna soup, manna spaghetti. What were we saying? Manna cakes, manna pizza. What are the manna things you can do for 40 years? I mean, now they're not at the 40-year point, but let's say for a year. For a year straight, you have to eat the variety of pasta. Now, Joe is like, oh, wow, that's great. For a whole year? But pasta. With our fickleness, finally at day 48, I'm like, okay, let's have something other. Let's order pizza. Let's do something. I'm getting Chinese food or something. Manna. Now, granted, they did have other meat, but. And it says, and again the Israelites started wailing. And said, if we only had meat to eat. They did have some meat to eat, but again, it wasn't what they wanted. We remember the fish. This is important. We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt at no cost. And the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. Now, by the way, do you think this is the Israelites speaking? The naturalized? Or was this probably the mixed multitude? Yeah, the mixed multitude. The Egyptians that came along, because the Israelites didn't have all this at no cost, all right? But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. Puh. That's what I think of manna. It's gross. That's all I get. I used to have really good things in Egypt. How soon we forget what God had actually provided for these people. But that's what he said. So after this complaint, in verse 11, I'm going to skip some of this. It says, Moses was at his wit's end, and he says to the Lord, he asked the Lord, why have you brought this trouble on your servant? I've been hearing this every day. Why have you brought this? What have I done to displease you that you may put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I create these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their forefathers? Where can I get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me. God, I'm the one bearing this burden. Give us meat to eat. I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, put me to death right now. If I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. Complaining sucks the life out of people. You know it does. It is so destructive. If you've ever been part of a family, and I'm maybe on a church family, a little bit corporate, where people bicker and complain about the music, about the preaching, maybe justified, about what the elders are doing, what the deacons are doing, about the food, about whatever, that is not of God. And it is so destructive. And you'll notice the one that it's most destructive to is the complainer. I have seen people become embittered with congregations, and it's partially their own undoing. I want you to know, if you are bitter with your communities, church community, whatever, we're sinful. I'm human. I am going to fail you. This family will fail you. We will fail. That's how it happens. Jesus is lifted up. He won't fail, but we will. And if you bicker and complain about us, you are letting the enemy eat up what is positive within your soul. Just know, whatever community you are a part of, it will fail. Complaining is not the answer. It sucks out life. Let me fast forward just so that you know, because I'm not going to read this. They complained about better food. We saw this. Then Aaron and Miriam get on the business. Hey, I hear a lot of people complaining. We want to do this too. And they complain about Moses' wife. Now, some believe that they were complaining, they were being racist to this Ethiopian woman. Now, I actually wonder, where I have read, that they were complaining because of what had happened earlier when she talked to her dad about things. And they were not part of the decision making. He decided to make a decision listening to a Midianite man instead of his own brother and sister. And so they were grumbling. I can't believe he did that. No matter what, they were complaining about his leadership. And if you remember the story, God says, she's going to have leprosy. And then they prayed for her, please. He said, I'll take it away, but she's got 7 days. She has to have leprosy for 7 days. You have to learn how destructive, this is as destructive to the body as leprosy. You're the leadership too. Don't do that. There's enough of it out there. And then, which we'll deal with later, they complained that the people in Canaan were too big for them. They complained about everything. Complaining will destroy relationships. lives and your spiritual walk. There's an article from the Family Life. It's from Family Life. And I'm going to highlight 8 things that they say that murmuring does. Not murmuring, murmuring. Murmuring is good. Murmuring, not murmuring. Murmuring is good, but murmuring. Number 1, now this is Christian. So it says murmuring, number 1, ignores God's potential. You basically say, God will not provide, so I'm going to complain. Number 2, murmuring is born in the context of bad report. So you will listen to bad report, and you will repeat bad report. Number 3, a murmuring spirit is quick to jump to the wrong conclusion. And you know that is true. A murmuring spirit is quick to jump to the wrong conclusion. Number 4, bad judgments are spawned in the atmosphere of murmuring. Because you've come to the wrong conclusion and you're like, well, here's a solution I want to do, there's a bad judgment there. Number 5, this one I definitely see, murmuring leads to self-pity. We pity our situation. Number 6, murmuring thrives in an atmosphere of fear. What if? And we start complaining. Number 7, murmuring left unchecked usually breeds rebellion. And then number 8, the end result of a murmuring spirit is a general atmosphere of dissatisfaction. And you know that's true. If you complain about your spouse enough, you will be dissatisfied with your spouse perpetually. If you complain about your church enough, you will be dissatisfied with your church. If you complain about the Seventh-day Adventist Church or Christians or whoever you're going to complain about, you will be dissatisfied with that group perpetually. So, we don't want to leave it there. What are the solutions? I don't know if I have solutions because I know that complaining has still, at times, affected my tongue. But what I would recommend is, first and foremost, if you are struggling with something, if you are dissatisfied with something or someone, Matthew 18. Did you hear me? Matthew 18. Go to that person. Some believe that why Cain, the biggest sin of Cain is that when he was displeased with the Lord not honoring his sacrifice, he didn't go to God. He went to Abel. He created the death of Abel because he would not go to God. So if I'm angry with you, if I am struggling with you, do not tell your neighbor, I go to you. You come to me. If you don't do that, you reject what Jesus, the formula Jesus gave you. Secondly, and this is just the trend of what I have seen, most complainers, in my experience, in my short experience, are people that don't do or give. Be part of a solution. If you don't have a solution in mind that you personally are willing to implement, because a lot of us are willing to give our opinion. You know, we really need this, and I can't believe we don't have this. Okay, start it up. Do it. I can't believe we don't do this. Well, we don't have the money. Do you give? I don't ask that, but I think, do you give? Do something. Be part of the solution. You know, thirdly and lastly, if there is something that is wrong that you need to speak up against, do it in the Spirit of Jesus Christ. With tears in your eyes, go to that person or those people and say, I want something better. I love you as my brother or sister. Let's change this together.